Question 1. The review process indicates that a trucking company operating in Ontario is facing challenges in implementing a new set of advanced driver assistance system, ADAS, safety protocols mandated by recent amendments to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. The company is concerned about the significant training investment required and potential disruptions to delivery schedules. Which of the following implementation strategies best addresses these concerns while ensuring compliance with Ontario's regulatory framework? Option A. Post the new ADAS safety protocol documentation on the company intranet and require drivers to review it at their own pace, delaying full implementation until all drivers have theoretically completed the review. Option B. Immediately enforce all new ADAS safety protocols across the entire fleet without additional driver training, assuming drivers will adapt quickly to the new technology. Option C. Implement the new ADAS safety protocols through a phased rollout, starting with comprehensive training for all drivers and supervisors, followed by a pilot program in one division to identify and resolve operational issues before a full-scale company-wide deployment. Option D. Prioritize implementation only in the most high-risk routes and for the newest drivers, while allowing experienced drivers on less critical routes to continue with existing protocols. Correct answer is C. Implement the new ADAS safety protocols through a phased rollout, starting with comprehensive training for all drivers and supervisors, followed by a pilot program in one division to identify and resolve operational issues before a full-scale company-wide deployment. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential challenge in implementing new safety protocols for commercial drivers in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for enhanced safety with the practical realities of driver training, operational efficiency, and regulatory compliance under the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the implementation is effective, sustainable, and legally sound. The best approach involves a phased rollout of the new safety protocols, beginning with comprehensive training for all drivers and supervisors, followed by a pilot program in a specific division to identify and address any unforeseen operational issues before a full-scale implementation. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of responsible implementation and due diligence mandated by Ontario's occupational health and safety legislation, which emphasizes proactive risk management and worker training. It allows for adaptation and refinement based on real-world feedback, minimizing disruption while maximizing the likelihood of successful adoption and improved safety outcomes. This method also demonstrates a commitment to employee well-being and compliance with the employer's duty of care under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. An incorrect approach would be to immediately enforce the new protocols without adequate driver training or a pilot phase. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for effective training and supervision, potentially leading to driver confusion, increased risk of accidents, and non-compliance with the Highway Traffic Act. Another incorrect approach is to delay implementation indefinitely due to perceived cost or logistical hurdles. This demonstrates a lack of commitment to safety and a failure to uphold the employer's legal and ethical obligations to provide a safe working environment, potentially exposing the company to liability and regulatory penalties. Finally, implementing the protocols selectively without a clear and consistent policy across all divisions would create an inequitable and confusing situation, undermining the overall safety objectives and potentially violating principles of fair labor practices. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape, including the Highway Traffic Act and relevant occupational health and safety legislation in Ontario. This framework should involve risk assessment, stakeholder consultation, including drivers and management, pilot testing of new procedures, and a commitment to ongoing training and evaluation. The goal is to achieve compliance and enhance safety through a well-planned, phased, and adaptable implementation strategy. Question 2. Performance analysis shows that a driver operating a vehicle in County Kerry was involved in a minor collision with another vehicle. There were no apparent injuries to any persons involved, but there is visible minor damage to the bumper of the Kerry driver's vehicle and a scuff mark on the other vehicle's door. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the driver in County Kerry? Option A. Leave the scene immediately as there were no apparent injuries, assuming the damage is minor and can be handled privately. Option B. Stop the vehicle immediately at the scene, ensure no one is injured, exchange details with the other driver, and report the incident to the Garda Síochána as property damage has occurred. Option C. Only exchange contact details with the other driver and assume no further action is required since the damage is minimal. Option D. Assess the damage yourself and decide whether it warrants reporting to the Garda Síochána based on your judgment of its severity. The correct answer is B. Stop the vehicle immediately at the scene, ensure no one is injured, exchange details with the other driver, and report the incident to the Garda Síochána as property damage has occurred. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kerry driver regarding the proper handling of a vehicle that has been involved in a minor collision. The driver must balance the immediate need to ensure the safety of themselves and others with the legal and ethical obligations to report the incident accurately and appropriately, adhering to the specific regulations of Ireland. The challenge lies in discerning the threshold for reporting and the correct procedure to follow, especially when the damage appears minor but could have underlying implications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately stopping at the scene, ensuring no one is injured, and exchanging details with any other parties involved. If there is damage to property, the driver must report the incident to the Garda Síochána, Irish police, as soon as reasonably practicable. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Road Traffic Act 2010 in Ireland, which mandates reporting of accidents involving injury or damage to property. It prioritizes safety and legal compliance, ensuring that all necessary information is gathered and reported to the authorities, which is crucial for insurance purposes and accident investigation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to stop at the scene of an accident, even if damage appears minor, is a serious regulatory failure. The Road Traffic Act 2010 requires drivers to remain at the scene and provide their details. Leaving the scene constitutes a hit-and-run offense. Assuming the damage is insignificant and not reporting it to the Gardaí is also a regulatory failure. The law does not permit drivers to self-assess the severity of damage to property. Any damage necessitates reporting. This approach bypasses legal obligations and can lead to complications if the damage is later found to be more serious or if the other party reports the incident. Only exchanging details with the other driver without considering the need to report to the Gardaí if property damage has occurred is incomplete. While exchanging details is a necessary step, it is insufficient if the legal threshold for reporting to the police has been met. This approach neglects the driver's statutory duty to inform the authorities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and ethical conduct. In the event of a collision, the immediate steps are to ensure safety, and then to ascertain if any legal reporting obligations are triggered. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Road Traffic Act 2010 in Ireland. If there is any injury or damage to property, the default professional action should be to report the incident to the Garda Síochána, regardless of the perceived severity of the damage. This proactive approach ensures all legal duties are met and protects both the driver and the public interest. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates that, while operating a commercial vehicle on Highway 401 in Ontario, a driver notices a persistent and unusual warning light illuminate on the dashboard, indicating a potential issue with the braking system. The driver is on a tight delivery schedule with a deadline approaching within the next 2 hours. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the driver to take? Option A. Ignore the warning light, assuming it is a minor malfunction that will not affect the vehicle's immediate performance, and proceed with the delivery schedule. Option B. Continue driving to the destination, but at a significantly reduced speed to avoid further damage and then report the issue upon arrival. Option C. Attempt a quick roadside inspection and minor adjustment to the braking system to see if the light deactivates before continuing the journey. Option D. Immediately pull over to a safe location off the highway and contact their dispatcher or fleet manager to report the warning light and await further instructions. The correct answer is D. Immediately pull over to a safe location off the highway and contact their dispatcher or fleet manager to report the warning light and await further instructions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance the immediate need to complete a task with the paramount importance of road safety and adherence to traffic laws. The pressure to meet a deadline can lead to impulsive decisions that compromise safety, creating a conflict between personal or professional objectives and legal obligations. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety and legality over expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately ceasing the operation of the vehicle and contacting the appropriate authorities or designated personnel to report the issue. This approach is correct because it prioritizes safety by preventing further damage to the vehicle and potential hazards to other road users. It also demonstrates adherence to the legal and ethical obligation to report vehicle malfunctions that could impair safe operation. In Ontario, the Highway Traffic Act mandates that drivers ensure their vehicle is in a safe operating condition and to report any defects that could compromise safety. This proactive reporting prevents potential accidents and ensures compliance with regulatory requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves continuing to drive the vehicle to the nearest service station, albeit at a reduced speed. This is professionally unacceptable because it knowingly operates a vehicle with a suspected safety defect, increasing the risk of an accident. It violates the driver's responsibility to ensure vehicle safety and potentially contravenes sections of the Highway Traffic Act related to operating unsafe vehicles. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the warning light and continue the journey as planned, assuming it is a minor issue. This is ethically and legally unsound. It disregards the manufacturer's and regulatory bodies' warnings, which are designed to prevent serious malfunctions and accidents. This approach demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for the safety of oneself and others, potentially leading to severe consequences and penalties under the Highway Traffic Act. A further incorrect approach is to attempt a temporary roadside repair without proper knowledge or tools. While well-intentioned, this can be dangerous and may not resolve the underlying issue, potentially exacerbating the problem or creating new safety hazards. It also bypasses the proper channels for vehicle maintenance and reporting, which are crucial for ensuring roadworthiness. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing and acknowledging the warning signal as a critical indicator of a potential safety issue. 2. Immediately ceasing operation of the vehicle in a safe location. 3. Consulting the vehicle's owner's manual or relevant safety guidelines for immediate actions. 4. Contacting the appropriate authority, e.g., supervisor, fleet manager, roadside assistance, to report the issue and seek guidance. 5. Following established procedures for vehicle repair and reporting, ensuring all actions are documented. This systematic approach ensures that safety is never compromised for convenience or expediency. Question 4. Investigation of a scenario where a client applying for a vehicle registration renewal in County Kerry expresses a desire to declare a significantly lower mileage than what is accurately reflected on the vehicle's odometer, citing a desire to reduce their annual road tax. The driver processing the renewal is aware that this misrepresentation could impact insurance premiums and potentially future vehicle inspections. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the driver to take? Option A. Clearly explain to the client the potential negative consequences of declaring a lower mileage, including increased insurance costs, potential issues with future vehicle inspections, and the legal ramifications of providing false information to the Kerry Driver Licensing Authority. Then proceed with the renewal based on the client's final, informed decision. Ensuring all documentation is accurate. Option B. Advise the client that it is best to simply proceed with the renewal as requested, as the road tax is based on the declared mileage, and the driver is not responsible for the client's insurance or future inspections. Option C. Process the renewal with the lower mileage as requested by the client, assuming the client understands the implications and is making their own choice. Option D. Refuse to process the renewal altogether, stating that the request is problematic and the client should seek advice elsewhere. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain to the client the potential negative consequences of declaring a lower mileage, including increased insurance costs, potential issues with future vehicle inspections, and the legal ramifications of providing false information to the Kerry Driver Licensing Authority. Then proceed with the renewal based on the client's final, informed decision, ensuring all documentation is accurate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between a client's expressed wishes and the potential for harm or financial detriment to that client, as well as potential regulatory breaches. The driver must navigate the ethical imperative to act in the client's best interest while respecting their autonomy, all within the framework of the Kerry Driver Licensing Authority's regulations. The driver's duty of care and the potential for misrepresentation or misleading advice are key ethical considerations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and comprehensively explaining the risks and implications of the client's request, documenting this advice, and then, if the client still insists, proceeding with the request while ensuring all legal and regulatory requirements are met. This approach upholds the client's autonomy while fulfilling the driver's duty of care to inform and advise. It aligns with the ethical principles of honesty, transparency, and client well-being, and adheres to the Kerry Driver Licensing Authority's guidelines on providing accurate information and ensuring compliance. The driver's responsibility is to facilitate the client's informed decision-making, not to make the decision for them, but also not to facilitate a decision that is clearly detrimental or illegal without proper disclosure. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the request without fully explaining the potential negative consequences for the client's insurance premiums and future licensing status is ethically problematic. It fails to uphold the duty of care to inform the client of all relevant factors, potentially leading to a decision made under false pretenses. This could be seen as facilitating a transaction without full disclosure, which is a breach of professional conduct and potentially against Kerry Driver Licensing Authority's consumer protection guidelines. Refusing to process the application outright, even after explaining the risks, might be seen as overstepping the driver's role. While the driver has a duty to advise, the ultimate decision rests with the client, provided it is within legal and regulatory bounds. An outright refusal without exploring all avenues of informed consent and documentation could be perceived as paternalistic and not in line with client-centered service principles. Suggesting the client lie or omit information to circumvent the issue is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. This constitutes fraudulent advice and would violate the core principles of integrity and honesty expected of licensed professionals. It would also directly contravene the Kerry Driver Licensing Authority's regulations regarding accurate reporting and could lead to severe penalties for both the client and the driver. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize clear, honest, and comprehensive communication. When faced with a client request that carries potential negative consequences, the decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the client's request and underlying motivations. 2. Identifying potential risks and benefits associated with the request, considering regulatory implications. 3. Clearly and thoroughly explaining these risks and benefits to the client using language they can understand. 4. Documenting the advice given and the client's response. 5. If the client, after being fully informed, still wishes to proceed, ensuring all actions taken are compliant with relevant regulations. If the request is illegal or fundamentally unethical, the professional must refuse to facilitate it and explain the reasons clearly. Question 5. Comparative studies suggest that drivers often feel pressure to pass their licensing tests. During a road test in Ontario, a driver, after making a minor error that they believe went unnoticed, attempts to reassure the examiner by stating, "Don't worry, I'm usually much more careful than that, and I know the rules perfectly." The examiner, however, observed the error and is aware that the driver's statement is a direct attempt to downplay their performance and influence the evaluation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Politely acknowledge the driver's statement, but then proceed to ask the driver to explain the specific rule they believe they may have momentarily forgotten, to test their knowledge directly. Option B. Immediately fail the driver for attempting to mislead the examiner, even though the observed error was minor. Option C. Accept the driver's assurance and overlook the minor error, focusing on the driver's overall positive demeanor and stated knowledge of the rules. Option D. Document the observed driving behavior accurately and continue the road test, evaluating the driver based on all observed actions and adherence to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. Correct answer is D. Document the observed driving behavior accurately and continue the road test, evaluating the driver based on all observed actions and adherence to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits a driver's immediate desire to pass against the fundamental ethical obligation to be truthful and competent. The examiner, acting on behalf of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, has a duty to ensure all drivers meet the required safety standards before being licensed. The driver's attempt to mislead the examiner, even if seemingly minor, undermines the integrity of the licensing process and poses a potential risk to public safety on Ontario's roads. Careful judgment is required to navigate the driver's pressure while upholding the examiner's professional responsibilities. The best professional approach involves the examiner maintaining a neutral and objective stance, focusing solely on the observable driving performance and adherence to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. This means documenting all observed driving behaviors, including any instances where the driver may have intentionally misrepresented their actions or intentions. The examiner must then proceed with the evaluation based on the evidence gathered during the test, irrespective of the driver's attempts to influence the outcome. This approach is correct because it aligns with the MTO's mandate to ensure driver competency and safety, adhering to the principles of fairness and impartiality. It upholds the regulatory framework by ensuring the licensing decision is based on objective assessment, not on a driver's subjective claims or attempts at manipulation. An incorrect approach would be to accept the driver's assurances without independent verification, or to overlook the observed behavior because the driver claims it was a minor oversight. This would fail to uphold the examiner's duty to assess actual driving skills and adherence to traffic laws. It would also be ethically problematic, as it compromises the integrity of the licensing process and could lead to the licensing of an inadequately prepared driver, potentially endangering others on Ontario's roads. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately fail the driver based solely on the driver's statement, without observing the actual driving behavior that would warrant such a failure. This would be an unfair assessment, and not based on objective evidence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective observation, adherence to regulatory requirements, and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Clearly understanding the objectives of the assessment and the relevant regulations, in this case, MTO licensing standards and the Highway Traffic Act. 2. Gathering factual evidence through direct observation of the driver's performance. 3. Evaluating this evidence against the established criteria. 4. Communicating findings clearly and impartially. 5. Resisting external pressures that could compromise objectivity. Question 6. The investigation demonstrates that a client in Ontario, who has been a long-term client with a history of making conservative investment decisions, is now requesting a significant portion of their portfolio be moved into a highly speculative, unregistered security. The client states they heard about this opportunity from a friend and are confident it will yield rapid, substantial returns, but they are unable to articulate the specific risks involved or the nature of the underlying investment beyond vague assurances. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Proceed with the client's request, but make a note in the client file that the advisor has reservations about the transaction. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to fully understand their motivations. Explain the inherent risks and regulatory status of unregistered securities and assess their comprehension of the potential consequences before proceeding. Option C. Refuse to discuss the matter further with the client, stating that the advisor cannot assist with investments in unregistered securities. Option D. Immediately execute the client's request to move the funds, as the client is an adult and has the right to direct their investments. The correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to fully understand their motivations, explain the inherent risks and regulatory status of unregistered securities, and assess their comprehension of the potential consequences before proceeding. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated wishes and the potential for harm or misrepresentation. The need for careful judgment arises from the obligation to act in the client's best interest while adhering to the ethical principles and regulatory requirements governing financial advice in Ontario. This situation demands a nuanced understanding of client capacity, the duty of care, and the prohibition against facilitating dishonest or misleading conduct. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's understanding and capacity to make the requested decision, coupled with a clear explanation of the implications and potential risks. This aligns with the Ontario Securities Commission OSC Rule 31-505, which mandates that registrants must deal fairly, honestly, and in good faith with clients. Specifically, it requires advisors to understand their clients' needs and circumstances, and to provide advice that is suitable. If an advisor suspects a client may not fully comprehend the consequences of their actions, or if the action could lead to a misrepresentation or harm, the advisor has a professional and regulatory obligation to investigate further and educate the client, rather than simply executing the instruction. This proactive and client-centric approach prioritizes the client's well-being and upholds the integrity of the financial advisory profession. An incorrect approach would be to immediately proceed with the client's instruction without further inquiry. This fails to meet the duty of care and could lead to the client making a decision they do not fully understand, potentially resulting in financial detriment or regulatory noncompliance. It also risks facilitating a misrepresentation if the client's stated intention is not aligned with the reality of the transaction. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse to discuss the matter further with the client, citing a lack of understanding. This is unprofessional and unhelpful, as it abandons the client without providing necessary guidance or clarification. The advisor has a responsibility to attempt to bridge any communication gaps and ensure the client is making informed decisions. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to proceed with the instruction while privately noting concerns without addressing them directly with the client. This is a failure of transparency and honesty, and it does not fulfill the advisor's obligation to ensure the client is acting with full knowledge and understanding. The professional reasoning process in such situations should involve 1. Active listening and identifying potential red flags or inconsistencies in the client's request. 2. Seeking clarification and probing for deeper understanding of the client's motivations and comprehension. 3. Educating the client on the implications, risks, and alternatives. 4. Documenting all discussions and decisions thoroughly. 5. If concerns about capacity or potential harm persist, seeking guidance from supervisors or compliance departments, and potentially refusing to proceed if regulatory or ethical boundaries are crossed. Question 7. Assessment of a client's urgent need for funds in Ontario, Canada, presents a complex ethical and regulatory challenge for an investment advisor. The client, who has a substantial long-term investment portfolio, has expressed an immediate need for a significant sum of money. The advisor is aware that liquidating a portion of the portfolio would meet the client's immediate need, but would also incur substantial capital gains taxes and potentially disrupt the client's long-term growth strategy. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the advisor to take? Option A. Persuade the client to liquidate their investments by highlighting the potential for short-term gains and downplaying the long-term tax implications and growth disruption. Option B. Recommend that the client take out a loan against their investment portfolio to access the funds, without a detailed assessment of their repayment capacity or the impact on their overall financial plan. Option C. Advise the client to immediately liquidate the portion of the investment portfolio that best covers the immediate need, emphasizing the speed at which funds can be accessed. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the client's entire financial situation, including their stated objectives, risk tolerance, and the implications of liquidation, and then present a range of suitable options, including alternatives to full liquidation, to the client for their informed decision. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the client's entire financial situation, including their stated objectives, risk tolerance, and the implications of liquidation, and then present a range of suitable options, including alternatives to full liquidation, to the client for their informed decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a client's immediate financial needs with the fiduciary duty to act in their best long-term interest, all within the regulatory framework of Ontario, Canada. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that any advice given is suitable and not driven by personal gain or pressure. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresenting the client's financial situation or recommending products that are not aligned with their stated goals and risk tolerance. The best professional approach involves a thorough and documented assessment of the client's financial situation, objectives, and risk tolerance. This includes understanding the client's stated need for funds and exploring all available options, including less detrimental ones than liquidating long-term investments. The advisor must then recommend a course of action that is suitable and in the client's best interest, clearly explaining the implications of each option. This aligns with the fiduciary duty and the regulatory requirements under Ontario securities law, which mandate that registrants act honestly and in good faith, and that recommendations be suitable for the client. The advisor must also consider the client's stated need for funds and explore alternatives that might preserve their long-term investment strategy. Recommending immediate liquidation of the entire investment portfolio without exploring alternatives or fully understanding the long-term consequences is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to uphold the fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest and could be considered a breach of suitability requirements. Prioritizes a quick solution over a well-considered strategy, potentially exposing the client to significant long-term financial harm and regulatory scrutiny. Suggesting that the client take out a loan against their investments without a comprehensive analysis of their ability to repay or the impact on their overall financial plan is also professionally unsound. This approach may not be suitable for the client's circumstances and could lead to financial distress. Violating the duty of care and suitability. Pressuring the client to accept the liquidation of their investments by downplaying the long-term risks or exaggerating the immediate benefits is unethical and a violation of regulatory principles. This manipulative tactic undermines the client's ability to make an informed decision and prioritizes the advisor's convenience or potential commission over the client's well-being. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the client's needs and objectives. This involves active listening, thorough data gathering, and a detailed assessment of risk tolerance. Following this, advisors should identify and evaluate all viable options, considering both short-term and long-term implications. Transparency and clear communication are paramount, ensuring the client fully understands the risks and benefits of each recommendation. Finally, all advice and client interactions should be meticulously documented to demonstrate adherence to regulatory requirements and professional standards. Question 8. Compliance review shows that a driving instructor in Ontario is facing pressure from a client who is anxious about their upcoming road test and wants to focus exclusively on practicing the specific maneuvers they believe they will be tested on, even though the instructor has identified other areas where the client's skills are weak. The client is concerned about failing and wants to cram the most likely test components. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible approach for the driving instructor to take in this situation? Option A. Suggest to the client that the instructor can subtly guide them during the test to help them pass by overlooking minor mistakes. Option B. Have an open and honest conversation with the client, explaining that while their concerns are understood, the priority is to ensure they are a safe and competent driver for all road conditions, and that a comprehensive review of all skills is necessary before they are truly ready for the test. Option C. Agree to the client's request and focus solely on practicing the specific maneuvers they are worried about, in an effort to boost their confidence for the test. Option D. Tell the client that their anxiety is unfounded and that they should just go ahead with the test as scheduled, trusting their existing skills. The correct answer is B. Have an open and honest conversation with the client, explaining that while their concerns are understood, the priority is to ensure they are a safe and competent driver for all road conditions, and that a comprehensive review of all skills is necessary before they are truly ready for the test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a client's immediate desire for a specific outcome with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and unbiased advice, even if that advice is not what the client wants to hear. The driver's anxiety and desire to pass quickly could lead them to seek shortcuts or to downplay their own shortcomings, creating a conflict between the instructor's duty of care and the client's perceived needs. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client receives the necessary training for safe driving, rather than simply being coached to pass a test under potentially unsafe conditions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a direct and empathetic conversation with the client about their current skill level and the necessity of mastering specific maneuvers before attempting the test. This approach prioritizes the client's long-term safety and the integrity of the licensing process. By clearly explaining that the goal is to ensure they are a safe and competent driver, not just to pass the test, the instructor upholds their ethical duty to provide thorough instruction and to avoid contributing to potentially unsafe road practices. This aligns with the core principles of responsible driving instruction, which emphasize competence and safety above all else. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to focus solely on the maneuvers the client feels are problematic, without a comprehensive assessment of their overall readiness. This fails to address potential gaps in other areas of driving competence and could lead to the client passing the test without being truly prepared for all road conditions, thereby compromising public safety. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's concerns and insist on proceeding with the test, regardless of their perceived readiness. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and could alienate the client, potentially leading them to seek less scrupulous instruction elsewhere. It also fails to acknowledge the client's anxiety and the importance of building their confidence through proper preparation. A third incorrect approach is to suggest that the instructor can help the client by subtly guiding them through the test or overlooking minor errors. This is a serious ethical breach and a violation of the principles of fair and objective assessment. It undermines the credibility of the licensing process and puts other road users at risk by certifying an inadequately trained driver. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client safety and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Active listening to understand the client's concerns and anxieties. 2. Conducting a thorough and objective assessment of the client's skills. 3. Communicating findings clearly and empathetically, explaining the rationale behind any recommendations. 4. Setting realistic expectations and outlining a clear path to achieving competence. 5. Upholding professional standards and regulatory requirements, even when faced with client pressure. Question 9. Regulatory review indicates a client wishes to use their newly purchased passenger vehicle for a purpose that deviates from its standard registration classification in Ontario, Canada, specifically requesting modifications that would effectively reclassify it for commercial hauling without proper inspection and re-registration. As a professional driver, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Inform the client that you are unable to assist with their request and immediately disengage from the situation without further explanation or guidance. Option B. Politely but firmly explain to the client that the requested modification and usage are not permitted under Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and relevant vehicle standards, and advise them on the correct procedures for reclassification and inspection if they intend to use the vehicle commercially. Option C. Agree to the client's request and operate the vehicle as they have described, assuming the modifications are minor and unlikely to be noticed. Option D. Suggest the client explore unofficial modifications or workarounds that might allow them to use the vehicle for their intended purpose without formal re-registration. The correct answer is B. Politely but firmly explain to the client that the requested modification and usage are not permitted under Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and relevant vehicle standards, and advise them on the correct procedures for reclassification and inspection if they intend to use the vehicle commercially. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated wishes and the potential for harm or misrepresentation. The driver must exercise sound ethical judgment and adhere strictly to the regulations governing driver licensing and vehicle operation in Ontario, Canada. The core of the challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the responsibility to uphold public safety and regulatory integrity. The best approach involves a direct and transparent conversation with the client, explaining the legal and safety implications of their request. This approach prioritizes honesty, regulatory compliance, and client education. By clearly articulating the reasons why the request cannot be fulfilled, the driver upholds their professional obligations under Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and the ethical standards expected of licensed drivers. This method respects the client while firmly adhering to the law, ensuring that no misrepresentation occurs and that the vehicle is operated in a manner consistent with its registration and the driver's qualifications. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the client's request without explanation or to attempt to circumvent the regulations. This would constitute a direct violation of Ontario's Highway Traffic Act, which mandates accurate vehicle registration and operation according to its class and purpose. Such an action could lead to severe penalties, including fines, demerit points, and potential suspension of driving privileges. Ethically, it breaches the trust placed in the driver to operate vehicles responsibly and safely. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the client's request and proceed as if it were never made. While this might avoid direct complicity in a regulatory breach, it fails to address the client's underlying issue or educate them on the correct procedures. This can lead to future misunderstandings or attempts to bypass regulations. It also misses an opportunity to foster a more informed and compliant client relationship. Finally, attempting to find a loophole or an unofficial workaround, even with good intentions, is professionally unsound. This undermines the integrity of the regulatory system and could inadvertently lead to unsafe practices or legal repercussions for both the driver and the client. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a commitment to understanding and applying the relevant laws and ethical principles, engaging in open communication, and prioritizing safety and compliance above all else. Question 10. Consider a scenario where a client in Ontario who has previously expressed a low tolerance for risk and a need for capital preservation now insists on investing a significant portion of their portfolio in a highly speculative cryptocurrency ETF. The client states they need to catch up financially and believes this is the only way. The total value of the client's portfolio is $100,000, and they want to invest $50,000 in this ETF. If this ETF has historically shown extreme volatility, with a standard deviation of 75% and an expected annual return of 20%, while the client's overall portfolio objective is to achieve a stable growth of 5% annually with minimal capital loss, how should the investment advisor proceed? Option A. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, documenting their insistence, as the client has the ultimate authority over their investment decisions. Option B. Explain to the client that the proposed investment is unsuitable given their stated risk tolerance and investment objectives, detailing the significant risks associated with the cryptocurrency ETF, and offering alternative, suitable investment strategies that align with their goals, such as a diversified portfolio of low-volatility equities and bonds. Option C. Advise the client that while the cryptocurrency ETF is risky, the potential for high returns might help them catch up financially, and suggest investing a smaller, but still substantial, amount like $25,000 to mitigate some risk. Option D. Recommend a different but still high-risk investment product that the advisor believes might offer a better risk-reward profile than the cryptocurrency ETF, even if it also falls outside the client's stated risk tolerance. Correct answer is B. Explain to the client that the proposed investment is unsuitable given their stated risk tolerance and investment objectives, detailing the significant risks associated with the cryptocurrency ETF, and offering alternative, suitable investment strategies that align with their goals, such as a diversified portfolio of low-volatility equities and bonds. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the conflict between a client's immediate financial needs and the long-term implications of a potentially detrimental investment decision. The professional must navigate ethical obligations to act in the client's best interest while also adhering to regulatory requirements designed to protect investors. The core of the challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the duty of care and the prohibition against recommending unsuitable investments. The best approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, followed by a clear explanation of why the proposed investment is unsuitable. This approach prioritizes the client's long-term financial well-being and aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on suitability and fiduciary duty. Specifically, under the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations, investment professionals have a duty to ensure that any recommendation made is suitable for the client, considering their financial circumstances, investment knowledge, and risk tolerance. Recommending an investment that is clearly outside these parameters, even if requested by the client, would be a breach of this duty. The professional must educate the client on the risks and explain why the investment does not meet their stated needs or risk profile, offering alternative, suitable options. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment solely based on the client's insistence, without adequately explaining the risks or exploring alternatives. This fails to uphold the duty of care and suitability requirements, potentially exposing the client to significant financial harm and the professional to regulatory sanctions. The professional is not merely an order taker, but a trusted advisor with a responsibility to protect the client from their own potentially poor judgment. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand the underlying reasons for their interest in the high-risk investment or offering any suitable alternatives. While the investment may be unsuitable, a complete refusal without further engagement can damage the client relationship and may not address the client's actual financial concerns. The professional should strive to find a solution that meets the client's needs within acceptable risk parameters. Finally, an incorrect approach involves pressuring the client to invest in a different, equally high-risk product that the professional prefers. This shifts the focus from the client's best interest to the professional's potential gain or preference, violating the principle of acting solely in the client's best interest and potentially engaging in misrepresentation. The professional reasoning process should involve 1. Active listening to understand the client's request and underlying motivations. 2. A comprehensive suitability assessment based on established client profiles. 3. Clear, transparent communication of risks and rationale for suitability judgments. 4. Offering and explaining suitable alternatives. 5. Documenting all discussions and decisions thoroughly. Question 11. Upon reviewing a client's account in Ontario, Canada, you receive a request from the client's adult child, who states they are acting on behalf of their parent, to withdraw a significant portion of the client's investment portfolio to cover immediate family expenses. The client is elderly and has previously expressed a desire to maintain their investments for long-term security. The child insists the parent wants the money and is pressuring you to expedite the process. How should you proceed? Option A. Immediately process the withdrawal as requested by the adult child, assuming they are acting in the client's best interest. Option B. Refuse the withdrawal outright, citing the client's previous stated intentions and the family's involvement. Option C. Prioritize the adult child's request and facilitate the withdrawal, as they claim to be acting on behalf of the client and are pressuring for immediate action. Option D. Speak directly with the client to confirm their understanding and consent for the withdrawal, assessing their capacity and the suitability of the transaction, and document the conversation thoroughly. Correct answer is D. Speak directly with the client to confirm their understanding and consent for the withdrawal, assessing their capacity and the suitability of the transaction, and document the conversation thoroughly. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a client's immediate financial needs with the fiduciary duty to act in their best long-term interest, all within the regulatory framework of Ontario, Canada. The advisor must navigate the potential for undue influence or pressure from the client's family, who may not fully understand the client's financial situation or the advisor's professional obligations. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client's autonomy is respected while safeguarding their assets and well-being. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's expressed wishes and understanding of their financial situation, while also fulfilling the advisor's duty of care and suitability obligations under Ontario securities law and relevant professional conduct rules. This means engaging in a thorough discussion with the client to confirm their understanding of the implications of the withdrawal, assessing their capacity to make such a decision, and documenting the conversation and rationale. If there are any doubts about the client's capacity, or if the withdrawal appears unsuitable, the advisor has a responsibility to explore alternatives and potentially involve other parties with the client's consent. This approach upholds the client's right to make decisions about their investments while ensuring the advisor acts ethically and compliantly. An incorrect approach would be to immediately process the withdrawal without further inquiry. This fails to meet the advisor's duty to ensure the transaction is suitable for the client and could be seen as facilitating a potentially detrimental decision without proper due diligence. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse the withdrawal outright based solely on the family's concerns, without first speaking directly with the client and assessing their capacity and understanding. This infringes on the client's autonomy and could lead to a breakdown in the professional relationship. Finally, an approach that involves solely deferring to the family's wishes, even if they claim to be acting in the client's best interest, is problematic as it bypasses the client and potentially ignores the advisor's direct professional responsibilities to the client. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's request and their stated reasons. This should be followed by an assessment of the client's capacity and understanding of the implications. If the request appears suitable and the client has capacity, the advisor should proceed while ensuring proper documentation. If concerns arise regarding suitability or capacity, the advisor must explore these concerns further, potentially involving the client's consent to speak with family or other advisors, and consider alternative solutions before proceeding with or refusing the request. Question 12. When evaluating a client's request during a driving test in County Kerry, Ireland, to avoid a specific road due to a past negative experience, what is the most professionally responsible course of action for the examiner? Option A. Acknowledge the client's concern, explain the importance of adhering to the planned route for assessment purposes, and offer reassurance about safety and the examiner's role in managing the situation. Option B. Engage in a lengthy discussion with the client about the nature of their past experience and debate the validity of their fear. Option C. Dismiss the client's concern as irrelevant and insist on proceeding with the original route without further discussion. Option D. Immediately agree to the client's request to avoid the road, prioritizing their comfort over the standard testing procedure. The correct answer is A. Acknowledge the client's concern, explain the importance of adhering to the planned route for assessment purposes, and offer reassurance about safety and the examiner's role in managing the situation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a client's stated wishes with the potential for harm and the ethical obligation to act in the client's best interest, even when those interests conflict. The driver's stated desire to avoid a specific route due to a past negative experience, while understandable from a personal perspective, could lead to a situation where the driver is less attentive or more stressed, potentially compromising safety. The professional driver must navigate this by acknowledging the client's feelings while upholding their duty of care and adherence to safe driving practices as mandated by the Kerry driver testing regulations. The best approach involves acknowledging the client's concern and exploring the underlying reasons for their anxiety without immediately agreeing to deviate from a potentially safer or more efficient route. This allows the professional to assess the validity of the concern and determine if a minor adjustment is feasible and safe, or if reassurance and professional guidance are more appropriate. This aligns with the principles of client-centered service while prioritizing safety and adherence to professional standards. The driver should explain that, while they understand the client's discomfort, safety and efficiency are paramount, and any route deviation would need to be assessed for its impact on these factors and potentially require a discussion about the test's objectives. An approach that immediately agrees to the client's request without any assessment of the impact on safety or the test objectives is professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to exercise professional judgment and a potential disregard for the core requirements of a driving test, which often include navigating various road conditions and routes. Agreeing without consideration could lead to a less effective assessment of the driver's skills or even compromise the integrity of the test. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the client's feelings outright and insist on the original route without any attempt at understanding or reassurance. This can create unnecessary tension and anxiety for the client, potentially affecting their performance during the test. While the professional must maintain control and adhere to standards, empathy and communication are crucial components of professional conduct. Finally, an approach that involves arguing with the client about the validity of their fear is also unprofessional. Focus should remain on the task at hand and ensuring a safe and fair assessment, rather than engaging in a debate about personal phobias or preferences. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with active listening and empathy towards the client's concerns. This should be followed by a professional assessment of the situation, considering safety, regulatory requirements, and the objectives of the task. If a client's request conflicts with these considerations, the professional should clearly and respectfully explain the rationale behind their decision, offering alternatives or reassurance where appropriate, and always prioritizing the safe and effective completion of their duties. Question 13. The analysis reveals that a client in Ontario who has been a long-term investor with you is requesting to liquidate a significant portion of their diversified portfolio to invest in a highly speculative, unproven startup. While the client expresses strong conviction and a desire for rapid growth, your due diligence indicates the startup has a high probability of failure, and the proposed investment would significantly increase their overall risk profile beyond their stated risk tolerance. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Inform the client that you cannot facilitate such a risky investment and suggest they seek advice from another advisor who may be more willing to accommodate their request. Option B. Immediately execute the client's request to liquidate the portfolio and invest in the startup, as the client has the ultimate authority over their investments. Option C. Advise the client on the substantial risks associated with the proposed investment. Explain why it is not suitable given their financial objectives and risk tolerance, and propose alternative strategies that align with their long-term goals while managing risk. Option D. Proceed with the liquidation and investment, but only after obtaining a signed waiver from the client acknowledging the high risks involved. The correct answer is C. Advise the client on the substantial risks associated with the proposed investment. Explain why it is not suitable given their financial objectives and risk tolerance, and propose alternative strategies that align with their long-term goals while managing risk. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated wishes and the potential for harm or contravention of regulatory principles. The requirement for careful judgment stems from the need to balance client autonomy with the advisor's fiduciary duty and adherence to the regulatory framework governing financial advice in Ontario. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and application of the client's best interests, as mandated by Ontario's regulatory framework for financial advisors. This approach prioritizes a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, even when these appear to conflict with their immediate, potentially ill-informed requests. It requires the advisor to educate the client on the implications of their choices, explore alternative solutions that align with their long-term well-being, and ultimately recommend a course of action that is demonstrably in their best interest, adhering to principles of suitability and prudence. This aligns with the fiduciary duty to act honestly and in good faith, and to exercise the care, skill, and diligence that a reasonably prudent person would exercise in comparable circumstances, as expected under Ontario securities law and industry codes of conduct. An incorrect approach would be to immediately execute the client's request without further investigation. This fails to uphold the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest and could lead to unsuitable investment decisions, potentially exposing the client to undue risk or financial detriment. Ethically, it bypasses the advisor's responsibility to provide informed guidance. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand the underlying motivations or concerns. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and a failure to engage in a constructive dialogue, potentially alienating the client and missing an opportunity to address their needs more effectively. It also neglects the advisor's role in client education and relationship management. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's request while downplaying the associated risks. This constitutes a misrepresentation of the investment's nature and potential outcomes, violating principles of transparency and honesty. It also fails to meet the standard of care expected of a financial advisor in Ontario. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, actively listen to and understand the client's request and underlying motivations. Second, conduct a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, objectives, and risk tolerance. Third, analyze the proposed action against regulatory requirements and ethical principles, particularly the duty to act in the client's best interest. Fourth, educate the client on the implications, risks, and alternatives. Fifth, recommend a course of action that is suitable and in the client's best interest, documenting all discussions and decisions. Question 14. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a client requesting assistance during their Kerry driving test to help them remember specific maneuvers. As a certified driving instructor in Kerry, what is the most appropriate course of action when a client makes such a request during a pre-test briefing? Option A. Lightly but firmly explain that the test is designed to assess their independent driving skills, and that any form of external assistance during the test would invalidate it and could lead to penalties, offering to review specific areas of concern with them before the test begins. Option B. Suggest that they might find it helpful to practice certain maneuvers in a way that might be perceived as less obvious to the examiner, without explicitly stating what that means. Option C. Agree to the client's request, assuming they mean they just want a little encouragement and that it won't significantly impact the test's integrity. Option D. Tell the client that you cannot help them in that way and that they should just try their best, without further explanation or offering support. The correct answer is A. Politely but firmly explain that the test is designed to assess their independent driving skills and that any form of external assistance during the test would invalidate it and could lead to penalties, offering to review specific areas of concern with them before the test begins. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated wishes and the potential for harm or misrepresentation. The driver's responsibility extends beyond simply following instructions. It involves ensuring the safety and integrity of the driving process, adhering to the rules of the road, and upholding ethical conduct as mandated by the Kerry Driver Licensing Authority (KDLA) regulations. The driver must exercise sound judgment to balance client satisfaction with their professional obligations. The best approach involves a direct and transparent conversation with the client, explaining the limitations and legal requirements of the driving test in Kerry. This approach prioritizes adherence to KDLA testing protocols and ethical standards. By clearly communicating that the test is designed to assess independent driving skills and that any form of external assistance would invalidate the test and potentially lead to penalties, the driver acts with integrity. This aligns with KDLA emphasis on fair and accurate assessment, ensuring that all candidates are evaluated on their own merits, as per the KDLA Driver Handbook Guidelines on Test Integrity. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the client's request without explanation. This fails to uphold the driver's professional responsibility to ensure the test is conducted fairly and in accordance with KDLA regulations. It could lead to the client attempting to cheat, resulting in a failed test and potential sanctions for both the client and the instructor, violating the KDLA principles of honest assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request rudely or without offering a constructive alternative. While it avoids complicity in cheating, it demonstrates poor professional conduct in client management, potentially damaging the reputation of the driving school and failing to educate the client on the importance of independent driving skills, which is a core objective of KDLA training. A further incorrect approach would be to subtly hint at ways the client might prepare, without explicitly condoning cheating. This creates ambiguity and could be interpreted as tacit approval of unethical behavior, placing the driver in a precarious ethical and regulatory position. It undermines the KDLA commitment to a transparent and objective testing process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the core principles of their regulatory body, KDLA. This involves identifying potential conflicts between client desires and regulatory requirements. The next step is to communicate clearly and ethically with the client, explaining the rationale behind the rules and the consequences of non-compliance. Finally, professionals must be prepared to uphold ethical standards and regulatory mandates, even if it means disappointing a client, to maintain their professional integrity and the integrity of the testing process. Question 15. Implementation of a client's request to alter a vehicle's appearance in a way that may contravene Ontario's vehicle modification regulations. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for a professional driver in Ontario? Option A. Agree to the client's request, assuming their intent is not malicious and that minor deviations from regulations are acceptable for client satisfaction. Option B. Refuse the client's request without any explanation, citing general company policy. Option C. Politely explain the potential regulatory issues with the requested modification, clearly state the inability to proceed with such alterations due to provincial laws, and offer to explore alternative, compliant modifications or services. Option D. Inform the client that the modification is possible but subtly imply that it might not be fully compliant with all regulations, leaving the ultimate decision and responsibility to the client. The correct answer is C. Politely explain the potential regulatory issues with the requested modification, clearly state the inability to proceed with such alterations due to provincial laws, and offer to explore alternative, compliant modifications or services. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated wishes and the potential for harm or misrepresentation. The driver must exercise sound ethical judgment and adhere strictly to the regulations governing professional driving services in Ontario. The core of the challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the responsibility to provide accurate and safe services, as mandated by provincial law and professional conduct standards. The best approach involves a direct, transparent, and regulatory compliant response. This means clearly communicating the limitations and legal requirements to the client, offering alternative solutions that fall within the bounds of the law, and refusing to engage in any activity that would violate regulations or compromise safety. This aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the Professional Code of Conduct for licensed drivers, which emphasize honesty, integrity, and adherence to traffic laws. By prioritizing these principles, the driver upholds their professional obligations and protects both themselves and the public. An approach that attempts to accommodate the client's request without full disclosure or by bending regulations is professionally unacceptable. This could involve agreeing to the request with a vague understanding or assuming the client's intent is benign, thereby risking a violation of the Highway Traffic Act or other relevant provincial statutes. Such actions demonstrate a failure to uphold professional standards and could lead to disciplinary action, fines, or license suspension. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without offering any explanation or alternative. While it avoids direct violation, it lacks professionalism and customer service. A professional driver should strive to educate the client about limitations and explore compliant alternatives, fostering a better understanding of the service's boundaries. Finally, an approach that involves misleading the client about the feasibility or legality of their request is also a serious ethical and regulatory breach. This erodes trust and can lead to misunderstandings that have legal ramifications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the client's request, identifying potential conflicts with regulations or ethical guidelines, consulting relevant laws and professional codes, communicating transparently with the client, and offering compliant solutions. If a request cannot be fulfilled legally or ethically, it should be politely but firmly declined with a clear explanation. Question 16. To address the challenge of a client in Ontario, Canada, urgently needing funds for an unexpected personal emergency, what is the most ethically sound and regulatorily compliant course of action for a financial advisor? Option A. Immediately liquidate the client's most liquid investments to provide the requested funds as quickly as possible. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the client's entire financial portfolio, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives to determine the most suitable way to access funds, potentially including exploring alternatives to immediate liquidation. Option C. Advise the client to seek a personal loan from a bank, as this is outside the advisor's direct responsibility for investment management. Option D. Recommend a high-interest, short-term investment product that can be quickly redeemed to cover the immediate need. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the client's entire financial portfolio, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives to determine the most suitable way to access funds, potentially including exploring alternatives to immediate liquidation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a client's immediate financial needs with the long-term implications of their financial decisions, all within the regulatory framework of Ontario, Canada. The advisor must act in the client's best interest while adhering to principles of responsible financial advice. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's overall financial situation, including their risk tolerance, investment objectives, and existing financial commitments, before recommending any course of action. This aligns with the fiduciary duty often implied in financial advisory relationships and the regulatory expectations in Ontario that advisors provide advice suitable to the client's circumstances. Specifically, the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) mandates that registrants act honestly, fairly, and with integrity, and that recommendations are suitable. A comprehensive review ensures that any proposed solution, such as liquidating investments, is not only addressing the immediate need, but also fits within the client's broader financial plan and does not expose them to undue risk or loss of future growth potential. An incorrect approach would be to immediately proceed with liquidating the client's investments without a deeper understanding of their financial health. This fails to uphold the advisor's responsibility to provide suitable advice and could lead to detrimental outcomes for the client, such as incurring significant tax liabilities or missing out on potential market gains. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without exploring alternatives or understanding the underlying reasons for their urgent need for funds. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and a failure to engage in a consultative process, which is crucial for building trust and providing effective financial guidance. Finally, recommending a high-risk, short-term investment to cover the immediate need without considering the client's risk profile would be a severe ethical and regulatory breach, as it prioritizes a quick fix over the client's long-term financial well-being and security. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with active listening to understand the client's stated needs and underlying concerns. This should be followed by a comprehensive fact-finding exercise to gather all relevant financial information. Subsequently, the advisor should analyze the gathered information in light of the client's objectives and risk tolerance, considering various potential solutions and their implications. The final step involves presenting a well-reasoned recommendation, explaining the rationale and potential outcomes, and ensuring the client fully understands the proposed course of action before proceeding. Question 17. Examination of the data shows that a client of a financial advisor in Ontario has just disclosed they purchased a significant number of shares in a publicly traded company based on a tip from a friend who works in the company's R&D department about a breakthrough drug trial. The advisor is aware that this information has not yet been publicly announced and is likely material. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Proceed with the trade as instructed by the client, as the advisor is merely executing a client's order. Option B. Immediately advise the client to cease all further trading in the company's securities and offer to assist them in understanding the implications of their actions and potential next steps. Option C. Advise the client to quickly sell their existing shares to lock in profits before the news breaks. Option D. Report the client's statement directly to the Ontario Securities Commission without speaking to the client first. The correct answer is B. Immediately advise the client to cease all further trading in the company's securities and offer to assist them in understanding the implications of their actions and potential next steps. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical obligation to protect client confidentiality and the regulatory requirements of the Ontario Securities Commission. OSC. The advisor must act with integrity and avoid any action that could be perceived as insider trading or a breach of trust. Careful judgment is required to navigate the potential for harm to the client's reputation and the market's fairness. The best professional approach involves immediately informing the client about the potential regulatory breach and the need to cease trading. This approach upholds the advisor's fiduciary duty to the client by proactively addressing a serious issue that could have severe legal and financial consequences for them. It also aligns with OSC regulations that prohibit trading on material non-public information and mandate reporting of potential breaches. By advising the client to cease trading and offering to assist in rectifying the situation, the advisor demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, thereby protecting both the client and the integrity of the market. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the client's statement and continue with the trade. This directly violates OSC rules against insider trading and demonstrates a severe lack of professional judgment and ethical responsibility. It exposes the client to significant penalties and the advisor to disciplinary action, including potential loss of license. Another incorrect approach would be to report the client's statement to the OSC without first speaking to the client. While reporting potential breaches is important, bypassing the client in this manner could be seen as a breach of the advisor-client relationship and could unnecessarily escalate the situation without giving the client an opportunity to explain or rectify their actions. It also fails to provide the client with the necessary guidance to avoid further regulatory infractions. A further incorrect approach would be to advise the client to quickly sell their shares before the information becomes public, framing it as a market opportunity. This is a thinly veiled attempt to facilitate insider trading and is a direct violation of OSC regulations and fundamental ethical principles. It prioritizes personal gain or expediency over legal and ethical obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance, ethical conduct, and client well-being. This involves 1. Identifying the potential regulatory or ethical issue. 2. Understanding the relevant laws and regulations, in this case, OSC rules on insider trading and client confidentiality. 3. Assessing the potential impact on all parties involved. 4. Communicating directly and transparently with the client to understand the situation and provide guidance. 5. Taking appropriate action to mitigate risks and ensure compliance, which may include advising cessation of trading and reporting to regulatory bodies if necessary. Question 18. Research into the operational guidelines for private hire drivers in Kerry, Ireland, indicates a scenario where a client in a hurry instructs their driver to mount the footpath to bypass a traffic jam. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the driver? Option A. Agree to the client's request and drive on the footpath to avoid the traffic. Option B. Politely refuse the request, explaining that driving on a footpath is illegal and unsafe, and continue to follow the road. Option C. Tell the client you will try your best to accommodate their request while still navigating the traffic jam. Option D. Instruct the client to ignore the request and proceed to drive on the footpath to reach their destination faster. The correct answer is B. Politely refuse the request, explaining that driving on a footpath is illegal and unsafe, and continue to follow the road. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Kerry driver due to the potential conflict between a client's explicit, albeit potentially ill-advised, instructions and the driver's responsibility to ensure the safety and legality of their actions. Driver must balance client satisfaction with adherence to road traffic laws and ethical considerations regarding passenger well-being. The specific context of operating a private hire vehicle in Kerry requires an understanding of the relevant Irish road traffic legislation and the code of conduct expected of professional drivers. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves politely but firmly refusing the client's request to drive on the footpath. This approach prioritizes safety and legal compliance. The driver should explain to the client that driving on a footpath is illegal under Irish road traffic legislation, specifically the Road Traffic Act 1961, as amended, and poses a significant risk to pedestrians and other road users. By adhering to the law and prioritizing safety, the driver upholds their professional duty of care and avoids potential legal repercussions, fines, or license suspension. This aligns with the ethical obligation of a professional driver to operate their vehicle safely and responsibly. Incorrect approaches analysis. Instructing the client to ignore the request and proceeding to drive on the footpath is a direct violation of Irish road traffic laws. This action would expose the driver to penalties, including fines and penalty points, and could lead to serious accidents involving pedestrians. It demonstrates a disregard for public safety and professional responsibility, suggesting to the client that they will try their best to accommodate the request, implying a willingness to bend the rules, is also professionally unacceptable. This creates a false expectation and could lead the client to believe that such actions are permissible or that the driver is willing to compromise safety for convenience. It undermines the driver's authority and responsibility to enforce legal and safe driving practices. Agreeing to the request without explanation and proceeding to drive on the footpath is the most egregious failure. This not only breaks the law, but also demonstrates a complete lack of professional judgment and a disregard for the safety of others. It could result in severe legal consequences for the driver and potential liability for the client and the taxi company. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the driving industry, particularly those operating in a regulated environment like Kerry, should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and ethical conduct. When faced with a client request that conflicts with these principles, the professional should 1. Identify the core issue. Is the request legal, safe, and ethical? 2. Consult relevant regulations, recall or quickly verify the specific laws pertaining to the request, e.g., Road Traffic Act in Ireland. 3. Communicate clearly and respectfully. Explain the legal or safety implications of the request to the client in a firm but polite manner. 4. Offer alternatives, if possible. Suggest safe and legal alternatives that might address the client's underlying need. 5. Stand firm on principles. Do not compromise on safety or legality, even under client pressure. 6. Document if necessary. In situations with significant potential for dispute or danger, consider noting the interaction. Question 19. In Ontario, Canada, a client expresses strong interest in investing a significant portion of their portfolio in a private equity fund, citing its perceived high growth potential. As a registered financial advisor, Which approach would be most appropriate to ensure compliance with Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations and ethical standards? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment to determine if the private equity fund aligns with the client's financial goals, risk tolerance, and investment horizon, and provide full disclosure of all associated risks, fees, and potential conflicts of interest before making any recommendation. Option B. Recommend the client invest in the private equity fund, but only after they have obtained independent legal and financial advice to confirm its suitability. Option C. Advise the client to invest in the private equity fund, focusing primarily on its potential for high returns, and disclose only the most significant risks to avoid overwhelming them. Option D. Immediately proceed with the investment as requested by the client, given their expressed enthusiasm and belief in the fund's potential. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment to determine if the private equity fund aligns with the client's financial goals, risk tolerance, and investment horizon, and provide full disclosure of all associated risks, fees, and potential conflicts of interest before making any recommendation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the overarching regulatory obligations of the financial services industry in Ontario, Canada. The advisor must act in the client's best interest while adhering to the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) rules and regulations, particularly those concerning suitability and disclosure. The core tension lies in ensuring that any recommended investment, even one the client is eager to pursue, aligns with their financial goals, risk tolerance, and overall investment profile as mandated by provincial securities law. The best approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation and investment objectives before recommending any product. This includes understanding their risk tolerance, liquidity needs, investment horizon, and existing portfolio. Following this comprehensive assessment, the advisor must then determine if the proposed investment in a private equity fund is suitable for the client. If it is deemed suitable, the advisor must provide clear and complete disclosure of all material risks, fees, and potential conflicts of interest associated with the investment, in line with OSC requirements for investor protection. This ensures compliance with the advisor's duty of care and suitability obligations. Recommending the investment solely based on the client's expressed enthusiasm without a proper suitability assessment is a significant regulatory failure. It violates the fundamental principle that advice must be tailored to the client's individual circumstances, not just their stated desires. This could lead to the client making an investment that is inappropriate for their risk profile, potentially resulting in substantial financial losses and a breach of the advisor's fiduciary duty. Proceeding with the investment without fully disclosing all associated risks and fees, even if deemed suitable, is also a serious ethical and regulatory breach. Ontario securities law mandates comprehensive disclosure to allow investors to make informed decisions. Withholding material information, even if unintentionally, undermines investor protection and can lead to misrepresentation. Suggesting the client seek independent legal or financial advice without first conducting the advisor's own due diligence and suitability assessment is an abdication of responsibility. While encouraging clients to seek external advice can be beneficial in complex situations, it should not replace the advisor's primary obligation to understand the client's needs and assess the suitability of the proposed investment themselves. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes client well-being and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Active listening and information gathering. Understand the client's request and underlying motivations. 2. Due diligence and suitability assessment. Conduct a thorough analysis of the proposed investment and its fit with the client's profile according to OSC regulations. 3. Disclosure and transparency. Provide all necessary information about risks, fees, and conflicts. 4. Recommendation and confirmation. Offer advice based on the assessment and ensure the client understands and agrees. 5. Documentation. Maintain detailed records of all interactions and decisions. Question 20. Market research demonstrates that clients often seek specific income figures from their investments. A client in Ontario has invested $500,000 and requires an annual income of $30,000 from their portfolio. Assuming a consistent annual inflation rate of 2% and a marginal tax rate of 25%. What is the minimum real rate of return before tax that the client needs to achieve to maintain their purchasing power and meet their income requirement? Option A, approximately 10.00%. Option B, approximately 4.00%. Option C, approximately 8.00%. Option D, approximately 6.00%. The correct answer is C, approximately 8.00%. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial needs and the long-term implications of their investment decisions, particularly when those decisions might be influenced by external pressures or a lack of complete understanding. The requirement to provide a specific, actionable financial projection necessitates a deep understanding of the client's risk tolerance, financial goals, and the current market conditions within the Ontario regulatory framework. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any projection is realistic, compliant, and in the client's best interest, avoiding misrepresentation or undue influence. The best approach involves a thorough, data-driven analysis that directly addresses the client's stated need for a specific income figure, while grounding it in realistic market expectations and the client's established investment profile. This includes calculating the required rate of return to achieve the desired income, then assessing the feasibility of that rate of return given the client's risk tolerance and the current economic climate in Ontario. If the desired return is unachievable without taking on excessive risk, the professional must clearly communicate this to the client, explaining the trade-offs and proposing alternative, more suitable strategies. This aligns with the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations regarding suitability and fair dealing, which mandate that investment recommendations must be appropriate for the client's circumstances and that all material risks must be disclosed. An approach that solely focuses on achieving the client's desired income figure without adequately considering the associated risks or the client's capacity to bear them is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This would likely involve recommending investments with a higher risk profile than the client can tolerate, potentially leading to significant financial losses and a breach of the duty of care owed to the client under Ontario law. Another unacceptable approach is to provide a projection based on overly optimistic or hypothetical market scenarios without clear disclaimers. This misrepresents the potential outcomes and fails to provide the client with a realistic understanding of the investment's likely performance, violating principles of transparency and honesty expected by the OSC. Finally, an approach that dismisses the client's request outright without offering alternative solutions or explanations fails to meet the professional obligation to assist the client in achieving their financial goals within appropriate parameters. While caution is necessary, a complete refusal without further engagement or exploration of viable alternatives can be seen as a failure to act in the client's best interest. The professional decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the client's request and underlying needs. 2. Gathering all relevant client information, risk tolerance, financial situation, goals. 3. Conducting a thorough market analysis relevant to Ontario. 4. Calculating potential outcomes based on realistic assumptions and the client's profile. 5. Communicating findings clearly, including risks and limitations. 6. Proposing suitable strategies and alternatives if the initial request is not feasible or appropriate. Question: market research demonstrates that clients often seek specific income figures from their investments. A client in Ontario has invested $500,000 and requires an annual income of $30,000 from their portfolio. Assuming a consistent annual inflation rate of 2% and a marginal tax rate of 25%, what is the minimum real rate of return before tax that the client needs to achieve to maintain their purchasing power and meet their income requirement? Options: A, approximately 8.00%, B, approximately 6.00%, C, approximately 10.00%, D, approximately 4.00%.